All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Shivaji Sengupta. I'm joined by Nick on my left. Nick, as you know, as most of you know, just recently exited our Department of Homeland Security as the Chief of Innovation. If I butcher up his title, he'll correct me. On the right, I have Bruno, who is the CEO of a very interesting quantum infrastructure company, and we will address some of we will always take questions at the end. So we are entering a period of technological convergence that may represent one of the most consequential shifts in cybersecurity since the advent of internet itself. Two transformative technologies, artificial intelligence and quantum computing, are advancing simultaneously, each capable of fundamentally altering how we protect, attack, and govern digital systems. AI is already reshaping cyber operations by threat detection, security analytics, and enhancing defense capabilities, as you see from hundreds of vendors here. And while quantum computing is progressing from a theoretical promise to more practical applications, large-scale cryptography relevant quantum computers may still be a couple of years away, but organizations are increasingly confronting a critical question. That is, how long can current encryption standards be trusted, and what preparations one you must make today to protect data and all that needs to remain secure for decades. And that's what this panel is about. This panel is really talking about this practical 2 or 3 things we could talk about, think about, and implement in our infrastructure to protect us from our favorite adversaries who shall remain nameless. So with that, turn to you, Nick. Having recently left one of the most important positions in federal government, defining policy for AI. I remember your policy on security controls for AI, which you drafted, which was adopted by the Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, which is amazing. If we were to reconvene 3 years from today, what development at the intersection of quantum computing and AI would likely have transformed cybersecurity? How addressing from a policy perspective, your experience, and having recently been authoring such policy?
Yeah, thanks, Shivaji. So I think the way to answer that question is to think about how we were thinking about these kinds of developments 3 years ago. So if we were thinking about quantum computing and things like that 3 years ago, what I would have said is, we would have this robust kind of public-private partnership that would be working to create the conditions for us to secure against a future quantum threat. But today we're in a position where we're kind of just right at the edges of that, even though there's a lot of policy and even some law that has been drafted to move the federal government toward more quantum secure solutions. So at the time that we were working on that policy, AI obviously existed, but it didn't exist on the scale that it exists today. So we didn't even really think about AI as this major piece of the quantum computing and post-quantum cryptographic future at the time. So now today, if we're going to answer that same question, and especially coming off of the new AI executive order that just came out, the Florida Attorney General's lawsuit against OpenAI that's just happened, we're starting to see this push toward more governance of these technologies and more trust in technologies. And the writing is really on the wall here for a lot of this. So if I'm thinking about what I would envision from 3 years from now and at the intersection of quantum, cybersecurity, and AI, I think I would see AI as being an enabler for not just kind of the detection of vulnerabilities, which is exactly what we're seeing now, especially in the release of Mythos, but also looking at how we can take a stepwise approach to securing our systems against a future quantum threat. Because the quantum threat is this big, big elephant. And how do we even start thinking about securing our systems against it? And Bruno has some really great ideas along these lines. But how do we start? Well, you start small, you prove success, and you scale up. You secure part of your network, then you secure the next, and you secure the next. And I think that an AI solution could really help us find the most efficient ways to create that security and to create a quantum future that we all want, which is one that is both secure from the threats of quantum, but also enabling the future of quantum. So I think that's the policy balance here, is how do we create a future where we reap the opportunities, but we mitigate the risks. And so that's the future that I would like to see, and how I think we should approach the cybersecurity problem regarding quantum.
Thanks, Nick. So just shifting, Bruno, you're more in the operational space of deploying quantum secure infrastructure, right? And what is the biggest misconception organizations currently have about either quantum threats or AI-driven cybersecurity, and especially in light of the use case you had mentioned during our prep meeting, or that AWS architect? If you could just summarize that quickly and just give a little bit on that.
Yes. Recently at a conference I was attending, a gentleman from AWS, Matt Campagna, who happens to be their chief cryptographer, came on and explained that inside AWS they had gone through this very complex exercise to figure how would they themselves, as an organization, transition their internal systems, all of their cybersecurity systems, to become quantum safe. So they did this work, and they looked at all the different services they had and the dependencies, and ultimately what they realized was that at the very core, pretty much across the entire segment, they had the constant theme was they needed the PKI to be replaced first. The ability to perform identification, which allows you to eventually create trust in different systems. So the PKI was the first thing they felt needed to be moved first in order to start building on top of it for the rest of the organization. And I thought it was really interesting because I happened to be from the generation of operators or product designers. Back in the 90s, 1994, I was part of a company where we build HSMs, or hardware security modules. And if you recall back, for some of us, back in November 1995, Netscape came out and they had this cool thing called a padlock, or SSL. And for the first time, you could sit in front of your machine and connect to something out there in the wild and be guaranteed that that connection was somehow legit, because there was something called a certificate that had been given to that server. And that certificate allowed you to decide, I'm going to purchase something, I'm going to change money in my bank account, I'm going to do some transaction. So from November 1995 to today, we've been building this internet that we live on the very same foundation. The trust foundations that were established because we had this trick called public key cryptography that had now been harnessed to create a trust framework that gave us the assurance that we could have some exchange and do on the internet what we had normally done by handshake or walking into brick and mortar stores. So the fun fact here is the fact that when the internet got to become what we know of it today, the digital infrastructure, it's a foundation of the digital economy, which, according to some estimates, represents almost half of the global economy now. It's that big. In 30 years, it went from nothing to half of the global economy. It rests entirely in this very foundational concept that we can trust, we can establish trust relationship. Behind that is this mathematical capability, public-private key pair. This is an awesome trick that we've been using for 30 years. That's when quantum computers have a very nasty possibility, because they can break that puzzle in minutes, whereas today's best compute capability could take thousands of years. So when you look at the AWS sort of thought experiment, and when they came out and said, how do we fix our own problem internally? First thing, PKI. And when you look back on how the internet got going, first thing, PKI. So it's kind of a very cool thing to know that If you've got a house that you've built and you need to replace the foundation, guess what? You need to go back to the foundations. You can't start with the roof. It's not the windows. It's going to be the foundations. The internet is no different. It's a maybe less physical infrastructure, but it lives on the same concepts. So for that reason, we have to get going, and the foundational piece is PKI at the very core. That's where I'd start.
Thank you, Bruno. Means that kind of brings me to the next question. And again, jumping back at you, Nick, because of your background experience, there are widely differing views regarding when quantum computers will be capable of breaking, ECC, RSA, and all that. What is your realistic assessment of the timeline? Because like our heading on our slide says, the quantum threat is here, not coming. So.
Yeah, so this is probably the question that I've been asked the most in all the times that I've spoken about this, which is quite a bit, including in my academic role and in my professional role. And people want to date, and I understand why you want to date, right? At what point do I need to be ready so that I can replace my hardware, I can catch up my budget, I can do all these different things? I get it, and I'm going to give a really annoying answer to that question. And the annoying answer is we're one breakthrough away. And what that means is that once certain elements of quantum computing are solved, that's when we will have a cryptoanalytically relevant quantum computer, which is a quantum computer that is of such capacity that it can break asymmetric encryption, RSA, and things like that. So when does that happen? So when I was at DHS, we created DHS's post-quantum cryptographic roadmap. And it has a series of recommendations for companies. And it goes through things like inventorying your different cryptographic systems that you operate. Like, do you know where all of your public key encryption actually is? And that goes to what Bruno was talking about, right? Do you need to start a PKI or do you need to start somewhere else? It depends. Maybe it might depend on your organization, but you need to do that inventory. Part of our estimate for that was DHS said it is going to be ready for a 2030 date. Now, that does not mean that DHS has special information, that it knows something that none of the rest of us know. It is that is the date that we set forth to say, this is the date by which we are going to be ready. And that was 6 years ago, and that date actually still looks pretty good. Now, that doesn't mean that, again, that I have some premonition or that I know something you don't, but it is something that we're watching closely. 2030 seems like a good timeline, but the reality is we're one breakthrough away. So there's a couple of things that you want to watch for when you think of these breakthroughs. A big one is quantum error correction. Somebody solves error correction, that is a big step forward. And if you are following the space at all, at the end of 2024 and into 2025, there were several claims by big companies that they had solved quantum error correction. Although, if you dig into it, for example, one of the big companies that made this claim published their results in Nature magazine, or the journal Nature, and there was actually an editor's note in there that said that they did not solve it. They created a framework for solving it, but they did not solve it. So you have to really kind of scratch the surface of some of these things, and remember that extraordinary results require extraordinary evidence. And if you really did do something like that, that is a massive scientific breakthrough, and we need to pay close attention to that. But my warning to everyone is be careful of some of that market hype, because a lot of these quantum companies need to start showing returns, and a quick way to do that is saying that you solved the biggest problem. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible, but that's the breakthrough to watch, and that's what will really allow us to understand that timeline better.
Very interesting, Nick. It's just like we spoke about how the shoe company went from going under to shooting up because they added AI to their
Allbirds. If folks have ever worn, maybe some people are wearing them, I don't know. Allbirds shoes. Allbirds has actually rebranded itself to be an AI company. That happened, I think, in April. So that was a fun, just add AI to it story.
Hey, but the stock price went from $3 to $17, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It did a pretty good buy.
It did.
I guess all of us missed that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here. But having said that, Bruno, from the operational side, all this is good. We're one step away. But yet, we have to think practically, what categories of data should organizations prioritize for quantum safe protection first? And how would they determine that priority?
I do. There's one thing I want to do is back to what Nick's answer. I've also been receiving the same exact question hundreds of times. I usually refer the person asking me the question to watch a movie called Imitation Game, which relates to the story of how in the Second World War, the Allies eventually had broken the Enigma. And the funny thing here is that it's not the fact that they had broken it. That is fairly well known. But what is not that well known is how long did we wait to let the Germans know that we had broken their algorithms? And the answer is 1974. So when you think of how long you want to keep such a secret, if I can break into your comms, I'm going to keep it very quiet, very long, and I'm going to keep using it for as long as I can. So something we have to keep in the back of our minds is it's one thing to have a view on the prediction of when it comes out, but nation states will not tell you when it has arrived. It will not be announced in a newspaper. It won't be a press release. No one will be telling you that it's out there and it's being used on you day to day. It's not going to happen. So you have to balance these two facts. On the one hand, we get a lot of knowledge about what's being done from a research point of view, and there's a lot of noise and a lot of folks making advances. We can keep track of that, and there's definitely signs that recently Google felt the signs are now showing up to be somewhere around 2029. But there's also the fact that some other folks out there are probably advancing and keeping it very quiet, and they may already be there or may be close to being there. And if they are, you're not going to find out. So that's one aspect to keep in the back of your minds as well. But back to more of the realities on the field, what we are finding is that we're finding that what seems to be helping the moving forward, I'd say the first one would be policies. So a couple of years ago, NSA had a fairly strong policy, NSA 2.0, which caused a very large segment of manufacturers and operators and designers of systems to up their games in order to meet those policies of purchase. In order to sell to the NSS, you had to have quantum readiness and built-in quantum capabilities. So those were very much a precise, timely kind of a capability that when that came out, that was a strong message, and it got a lot of developers to move. What we're finding is it seems to be, sadly, that sort of, it requires a bit of a stick somewhere. The carrot doesn't seem to always work, unfortunately. And I understand. I mean, it is complicated. It's not an easy thing for anyone to migrate their internal systems to be quantum safe. But as Nick was saying, you need to start somewhere. You need to bite. It's a big elephant, and we need to start biting one bite at a time is how it's going to be done. I'd say very much that's where we see things happening these days on those fronts where policies have been set and they're very strong and they are being followed.
That's a great point.
So can I, Bruno, I want to comment on that, because what Bruno's talking about is kind of how the policy environment affects the technical and the developer environment. And one of the very frequent and often understandable, criticisms of policy is that it lags behind technology. But what's interesting is that in the quantum space, quantum policy has actually been, in some cases, a good bit ahead. Yeah. So DHS's post-quantum cryptographic roadmap came out in 2021. Mm-hmm. It was followed very closely by National Security Memorandum 10, and then the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act came out in 2022. So there's actually a law in the books that says that the federal government has to transition to post-quantum cryptography. So that was 4 years ago, at least that was 4 years ago, right? And in some cases, up to 5 years ago. So the policy environment has actually not lagged. So what is it? Why are we having a conversation here about how we're talking about, like, look, you can just take little pieces and you can do small proofs of concept. Yeah, that's all true, but why weren't we doing that 3 years ago? And that's one of the question that Shivaji opened with. why didn't we do this 3 years ago? And I think the question, or the reason is because of the next question, which was, well, give me a timeline. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't give you an exact timeline. I can give you some parameters, but I cannot point at a date. And because I can't point at a date, there are a lot of people that say, you know what, I just don't believe that it'll happen. So I won't have to worry about it. I'll be retired by then, or whatever the question is. Well, and this is not one of those, like, what you believe about this doesn't really matter, right? It's coming. It's an engineering problem. It's not a physics problem. It's not a math problem. It's just us getting the engineering right. And once we do that, we will have this capability. And the question is, are you going to start on that day? Or are you starting before that occurs? And I realize that's a hard thing for like P&Ls and things like that, but it is a security measure that we're all going to have to take. And the policy and the law is not exactly ambiguous on this. And it hasn't been for years. So the question now is, can we educate ourselves enough? Can we create enough of a priority to start to push this ball down the road?
Yeah, the ostrich syndrome is never a good thing, right? And that, that's an awesome point, Nick. And that brings me to our next question about the concept of crypto agility.
Yeah.
I think that's a phrase. Write it down. That's a new thing that we're talking about. Is it's increasingly emphasized. What does true crypto agility look like in practice? Means I'd like both of you to take that up.
Yeah, I'll just quickly comment. He has more of the technical side than me, but if any of you thinks that this is the last time that we're going to have to transition our cryptography, like, that's a fantasy. We're going to have to do it again. And because we didn't think that we would have to do it when we invented RSA, but quantum computers came around, now we're going to have to make this transition. So we're going to have to do it again. And we are unlikely to have multiple years to do it. And so we need a quicker way to do cryptographic transitions, ideally through software. If we can do it software defined, that's even better. So cryptographic agility would be the ability for us to quickly change cryptographic systems at a hardware level, and I'll let Bruno talk about that. But that agility, that's the next level. So getting quantum prepared is kind of first level. Getting to crypto agility is the next level. That will really create the security you're looking for.
And in our case, what we did is we actually started to look at the problem quite a few years ago, and I decided that to achieve cryptographic agility in today's age, as you said, you need a hardware platform that has built-in agility, but you want the software-definable capability. So it's software-defined, hardware-enforced crypto agility that you're looking for, which is a sweet spot. And absolutely agree, you need to make sure that you plan well ahead and you better plan for constant changes in your life. If you look at where NIST is at today, we have 3 algorithms that have been selected to be quantum safe, PQC. There's something like another 9 algorithms currently being worked on. Other countries have decided on a couple more algorithms. So the world as we know it today is not going to be the same as what we're just leaving behind. We had 1 or 2 algorithms that did everything. It was a miracle. It worked so well. We had, a problem came up and we looked at it and we went, let's use RSA. Another problem came up, let's use RSA. So for the vast majority of the last 30 years, we've been in the cryptographic community, have been kind of lazy because we had this one-trick pony that could do it all. We're about to embark on a completely different journey where we need to be thinking before we select, because some of these algorithms are good at certain parts, bad at other things. You need to be keeping that in mind, and it's going to be constantly changing. And I said something also about the fact that very much at the core of, again, if you're thinking back of what is it that we do this for, it's to continue being able to achieve digital trust on the internet. So when you think of trust, you think of the ability to guarantee that some of those cryptographic assets are well protected, highly protected. So usually, when you get that need, you basically have very specialized designed hardware designs, HSMs and so on. That's hardware. And one of the things that I'm most afraid to live through, and I hope I never have to do that, is my worst fear is the day I wake up and there's a newspaper article that now tells the world it's no longer 3 years away, it's a month or two away when everything gets broken. That day will mean panic. Everywhere is going to be panic, panic, panic. Everyone will want to be replacing everything they have in months. It will look likely the same as what we've lived through when we had COVID walk into our lives and everybody wanted to have masks. And we all found out that it just doesn't appear like that. It's a piece of material. You need to build it, you need to ship it, you need to deploy it. There's a logistic concept behind it. And right now, I think people think PQC readiness is all about software. And I keep trying to explain that there are components that are built in hardware and they don't have the same logistics pattern behind it. So that worries me a lot. And that's one of these aspects that I love the fact that the policies have been super good at keeping ahead. Now I'm hoping that folks start to buy because it's going to get crunched in the end and it's going to be nasty.
And thanks, Bruno. And again, just to be fair, we need to talk about this interesting concept called AI, which everybody in this room has spoken about. And with all the discussion about AI and quantum separately, what happens when they are combined? Is the combination effect additive or exponential? Nick?
Yeah, I think it's exponential, and this is something that I've heard folks talk about for a while. Is what happens when these two things come together. In the emerging tech world, we call that convergence, right? So when you bring together different technologies to create something that is larger than the whole. And so, from a perspective of quantum and AI, I mean, think about the things that AI needs. Like AI does a lot of things. Let's talk about what AI needs. AI needs compute, needs data, right? So quantum helps you with both of those, like an exponential increase. But here's a really important thing to remember about quantum. A quantum computer is not necessarily better than a traditional computer. It's an entirely different kind of computing altogether. Now, it allows us to do things like solve Shor's algorithm to break public key encryption, because that type of computing was not available to us in traditional computing. So we will have to change the way we think about AI and probably engineer AI. But if we do that right, it does become an exponential increase in what the type of AI capabilities that we think about today. So quantum and AI is a really interesting kind of buzz phrase that has been going around for a while, and even I think Google even has like a quantum AI lab. So there's a lot of thought around that. But what exactly it looks like is going to be hard because, again, the quantum computing is an entirely different type of compute. AI is designed for our current compute. And so we'll have to really think about how that gets integrated or how it gets changed to be integrated. But the thing to remember is quantum does create more compute capacity, and it does create the ability to ingest and process more data. So that alone has at least the seeds to create an exponential increase in AI capabilities.
Thanks, Nick. So I just go back to Nick. You spoke about regulations earlier. Now, there's regulation we have framed around AI. You have framed around AI when you were still in government, and there's on quantum. What about this additive or exponential combination?
Yeah.
Should we run for the hills?
Well. To be clear, as someone at DHS, I never wrote regulation because that was not within my remit. So I did not do regulation. But for policy, but no, I mean this is why in the policy world, it's actually really important to almost have this, I would say, kind of combination between entrepreneur and think tank, because you do have to look down the road, look around the corner, and see certain things and start to think about them and just get the first thing on paper. So all the different policies that I've written, have they all been picture perfect? No, not at all. But we started, and then it was built on from there. And that's really what you're trying to create. Because policy usually doesn't come with money, and it doesn't come with enforcement. So what does it do? It creates priority where there was none before. And if you can do that, you can start to do things like shift budgets. You can do things like get people out to do education, to do engagement and things like that. And that's where you sort of grow those things. So from the perspective of creating a policy around quantum and AI, I think we will need to think about that. But really, we haven't solved the quantum security problem yet. And that policy's multiple years old. So I think that we have to really buckle down on building the foundation for quantum security and preparedness, and then we can start building into what that future looks like when we have that AI convergence.
I couldn't agree more. If you think of what quantum can do with respect to quantum computers and their ability to break the current layer of cryptography we have, which ultimately everything that we do in the cyberspace and all of the tricks we've developed over the last 30 years to achieve cybersecurity capability, they tend to all depend on, at some very bottom level, they're dependent on cryptographic tricks. And lots of it has to do with public-private key pairs. And that's where quantum comes in. Very much at that very bottom layer, quantum computers can actually make that friddle away. So you could have perfectly implemented cybersecurity perfect designs because of AI. So you could take your AI, go through all your products and make them absolutely guaranteed 100% perfect. No bugs, nothing left. But if you still use the same cryptography we use today, you have no security. So PQC is ultimately a thing that needs to move almost, it has to be the top priority, because that ultimately is the foundational layer of everything else we built on top of it. And I think in that sense, that PQC is a constant, needs to be a constant effort. We absolutely need to guarantee and nail that before it's too late.
And Bruno, you almost got me started on my next question. And I think, again, operationally, what are the first, and you said PQC, first 3 actions you would recommend to prepare for a quantum-safe, AI-enabled cybersecurity future?
As I said many times, if you run a cybersecurity operation, and inside that operation, your enterprise, you do have either hardware devices that are critical to the operation. It could be HSMs behind your PKI, or it could be smart cards, it could be different devices. I would say these are probably the longest thing to replace. So you need to start looking at that first. If you have PKI, as the folks from Amazon and how the world, the internet evolved, I'd say that's another very easy peasy, no regret decision here. You make those steps, you're not going to regret it. And I would suggest, use AI wherever you can to secure your designs, to improve the cybersecurity of your design if you're responsible for making some of these, creating some of these capabilities. So definitely the kind of thinking that goes here is PQC is ultimately a foundation that you need to replace first. And if it happens to live inside some specialized hardware, you need that to be replaced as well. And it takes longer. You know, you can't just replace a piece of hardware by downloading it. You have to buy it, you have to get it delivered, installed, and operationalized. Software is a different thing, but hardware is definitely different. So hardware, first, get your PQC story, get going if you have a PKI, and use AI wherever you can would be my kind of 1, 2, 3 things.
No, very interesting. Thank you. You know, this is so. Just Nick, just taking on during a lunch conversation, we're talking about how everything in government is a 10-year life cycle, infrastructure, everything else, and we spoke about some of the challenges of budget allocation, going through the acquisition life cycle, and all that. So, how would you advise security leaders today, and how do you balance investments across these areas? We spoke about 500-pound gorilla versus 5 monkeys. Would you like to step through that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love this visual. But so I think that the problem oftentimes with security professionals is that they're thinking about quantum readiness as a you are or you aren't, right? It's a 1 or a 0. But really, this is much too big of a problem to just write one check and finish it entirely. And so it's unlikely to be a, here's $100 million that's going to fix everything. It's more likely that there are going to be some smaller projects that we work on, that we build the foundation and we scale those projects up to work on quantum security as a whole. Because as you just heard Bruno talk about, there are multiple facets of the type of security and the type of things that you would want to implement. So whether that's your PKI or, or maybe you don't even have kind of a governing strategy or an implementation plan. I mean, you may not even have that part. Or maybe you need to replace hardware. I mean, there's a bunch of different aspects to this. So one of the things that we advised really early on when I was at DHS was do that inventory, use that inventory to prioritize systems and functions and processes that you want to tackle first. And a big part of that is, do you know where your vulnerabilities are? Do you know where you're using public key encryption for data in motion? Do you know where that is? And if so, what data is behind that encryption? Once you can answer that question, then you can prioritize how you attack the problem. And so I think, and this is Shivaji's visual, so I won't take it away from him, but the 800-pound gorilla versus 5 monkeys is actually a lot easier way to think about this. And I think that's the way that we have to go, because over the last couple of years, again, if you would have asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have said, people are going to be well on their way by 2026. Well, we need to figure out a way to get on the way. What is the start point? What's the first bite? And I think thinking about it more as building a foundation and working up is a better way to think about how to create that real resilience that will last.
Cool. Bruno, I think, again, moving to you from the operational perspective, let's talk about workforce preparation, right? Great, we have a product. So what? What new skills with professionals over the next 3 to 5 years need to have in AI and quantum, and how would they prepare for something like that?
One of the things that has come out from DHS, NIST, lots of these recommendations from a few years back, all the way back to 2021, were go and get your inventory. Go check where you've got cryptography. And one of the things that I found fascinating was there was a diagram that a bank in Europe came out and had a list of all the algorithms and kind of a bar graph of how many instances of RSA and MD5 and SHA-1 and DES. And it was like this kind of shape figure of how many instances at the top was RSA. And I looked at it and I thought, that there are not enough human beings on this planet to figure how from that picture to transition to a post-quantum era. Because when you start to think of it, these RSA instances, as I said earlier, are they all within a certificate that's used for authentication? Is it used for firmware signing? Is it a certificate that's used for access control? What is it for? So RSA is one thing, but ultimately when we replaced it in the future, we may end up having to do 3 replacements. It used to be key transport for SSL. Well, now it's going to be ML-Chem. It's no longer RSA. And then that work, in order to figure from all that info how to transition, I think is where AI, have maintained that someone with some smarts should take an AI tool to train it on how to navigate and translate these massive amounts of data and turn that into a proper plan of attack for people to go, all right, here's your plan. You need to do this first. The next thing is this, and so on and so forth. And to prioritize it based on their systems. That is where I believe an AI tool would be phenomenally useful. That'd be my first one.
No, absolutely. And to your point, Nick and I are both adjunct professors. He teaches national security. I teach applied cybersecurity. But to your point, there aren't enough humans on this planet to do that. And AI is the force multiplier to say. So one of the interesting conversations Nick and I are having over lunch is for your AI deployment, the AI maturity. What is the metric? What is the baseline of your AI maturity? And Nick had some interesting thoughts about that.
Yeah, so what we're really talking about here is governance of AI. And that's something that we're definitely seeing a lot of both policy and kind of market forces pushing toward more governance of AI. Whereas before it was kind of buy it, get it in, start creating value. But we've seen a lot of AI failures, and there's a lot of companies out there and a lot of agencies out there and individuals out there that would prefer to not fly the plane into the mountain. And so now, right, we're starting to think about how we avoid that. And when you look at these, the big frontier models, you start to think about how do you evaluate how that model is performing? What do you look at? The billion or hundreds of billions or trillions of parameters and weights that are not open source? Like, no, of course not, right? That's not the way. Or do you look at the data it's trained on, which is the entirety of digitized human thought? Do we look at that? Well, no. So you have to find a way to evaluate the output. How do you evaluate what is being given by the AI relative to what was asked for? So for example, if I'm being very adversarial toward an AI system and it's holding me off, then that system's being robust. But if I'm being just a regular user and it's throwing hate speech or toxic language at me, then that would be fragility. But how do you quantify that? And so we talked about this concept of governance 1.0 versus governance 2.0. Governance 1.0 is, do you have a strategy? Do you have an implementation plan? Are you measuring how it's being implemented? Do you have a governance or oversight body? Are you doing things like audits, right? That's kind of a governance 1.0 model. A governance 2.0 model is all of that, but you have metrics to actually back it up that tie to your actual use case. How do you create those metrics? And so I think there's some interesting thought out there on how to do that. But one thing I definitely want to say is AI should not evaluate AI. And so if you do that, you just run into like who watches the Watchmen, and that just goes on forever. We have to come up with smarter ways to do it. And that's something that's we're seeing some development around.
Absolutely. So thank you. So just FYI, from a time check perspective, we have about 15 minutes left in this panel, and on the screen there you see QR code. If you want to continue this conversation outside the conference, hit the QR code and put in your information, and we'll set up a call to speak with the same panel on maybe some of your use cases or steps 1, 2, 3 in your environment, in your industry that might work. So with that, Bruno, from operational perspective, what is the most widely accepted assumption about quantum or AI that you believe is fundamentally wrong?
Lots of people think that it's a one-for-one replacement. That's definitely one thought that I've heard over and over. Quantum, at least in the case of cryptography, what we are now having to design for in the future with crypto agility, with the fact that there's a translation that goes somewhere between RSA, ECDSA to one of multiple choices, that entire transformation requires a very renewed, rethought, a lot of reverse engineering, to be honest, in many cases, because some of these protocols were designed 20 years ago and they still work, but now we have to go back to the premise that we designed it for and reflect on that. So there's a whole lot of rethinking that needs to be applied. Another thing that I find that is quite insidious is when you, especially in my field, I find that too many of the other vendors, I'll call it that way, tend to use a lot of marketing material to flash a whole lot of PQC readiness and so on and so forth, when the entire design of the box is itself 30 years old, which means it's classic with a bit of paint on it. I often refer to it as you're trying to get to a zebra, but someone is bringing a white horse and they're painting black stripes on it. That's the kind of thinking of, I find that to be a bit disingenuous in terms of an approach. And also one of the other thing is, when you look at the effort we need to all achieve in order to achieve quantum readiness, we can't just do what we've been doing for 30 years and apply the same formula. We're not going to get there. We need to become very good at integration, at easing the operational burden of these capabilities or tools. So It's a very strong point that I'm thinking, there's a lot of rethinking of how we've done things and how we need to do things in the future. From that perspective, you need to be very, very agile and thinking outside the box. It's not just a one-for-one replacement. It needs to be reinvented for the future. And the future is very different from where we're coming from in the space of quantum cryptography.
Thanks, Bruno. So, Nick, shifting back to you, in the global race among us and our near peers, and we all know who that is, of people influencing cybersecurity strategy and technology development, which side gains from the convergence of quantum and AI? Is it the attacker, or the defender, or both? And it's a pretty complex question because we have near peers outspending us 20-1 in some of these technologies. How do you go about, what are your thoughts and how do we even address that, put our arms around it?
Well, the first thing is, I think that, yes, we do have near peers that are outspending us, but then there's also near peers that we don't actually know how much they're spending. We don't actually know. And that should worry you. And what that does is that creates this very straight line from where we are today to a future that Bruno talked about when he was talking about breaking of the Enigma and Bletchley Park. That is the best kind of that is the best analogy here, because think about, can we all agree that information is power in 2026? Okay, then if that's true, then you can think about a cryptoanalytically relevant quantum computer as one of the most significant weapons that we might see. Now, yes, there are a lot of opportunities that come with it, like developing new drugs and new materials and things like that, and that's all very, very important. But also, if you're able to read what everyone else thinks is encrypted traffic, but you don't tell anyone, that becomes a really big advantage. And one of the things I tell my classes is, if you were the dictator of the first country to get a cryptoanalytically relevant quantum computer, would you hold a press conference?
Nope.
Boy, I sure wouldn't. I wouldn't say a word. And so from an intelligence perspective, we should probably be thinking about intelligence requirements that show us indicators of the potential for a major breakthrough in one of our adversaries when we're not seeing what they're doing publicly. So that's one. But I think that to answer the question directly, the attacker has the advantage if two conditions are true. One, they develop it before we do, right? And they keep that a secret. But two is we do nothing. If we do nothing, then they definitely have the advantage. But if we were able to do a full transition, if we started our transition in 2021 and we were 5 years into it now, that wouldn't be true, or at least it wouldn't be as true.
Correct.
And so those two conditions are what we have to worry about, one of which we can control, one of which we can't control. But we should control what we can, because that advantage is going to be critical.
Thank you, Nick. Your response to that?
Yeah, well, I would completely agree with that and suggest that one definite tool I would use for helping to accelerate the transition would be AI. So AI in this case can be your friend if you're trying to get to close the gap between what we predict to be the day of quantum computers. Using AI capabilities will help our decision-making process, will help us go from where we stand today to an era where we're going to be quantum safe. So AI tools definitely would help, and you need post-quantum cryptographic capabilities, obviously. But I completely agree with Nick on that one.
Okay, let me ask a question from both of you, right? If everybody in this audience had to take one action in the next 12 months to improve the organization's readiness, what would that be?
Do your cryptographic inventory.
And I would suggest, if in that list, if you find that you have a PKI, go do that while you're continuing to do your cryptographic inventory. Don't even wait to the end. Go do that first, or if you have it.
So I recently read an article. So you're talking hardware, right? On the hardware side, also we have significant vulnerabilities that have been identified on the base infrastructure perspective, doing PKI or whatever cryptography. How is there a precursor to doing cryptography or hard PKI that we should do to sanitize what we're going to do? Start with, are we going to do assessment, or how would you go about it?
Yeah, so I think that, but before you start, I guess like cutting the really big checks, I think you need to have an idea of what your environment looks like. And that's going to be unique for every organization. Now, we know some things for sure, right? We know the types of encryption that will be vulnerable. We know that there are sensitive information that's behind that encryption. Now, that's going to vary depending on what you do in your organization, but those are the things we know for sure. The things that we don't know for sure are going to be the kind of the process things, and then I would say the workforce education part of this. Like, does your workforce understand actually not just that quantum is a threat, like a yes or no question? That's not sufficient. What is the difference between a bit and a qubit, and why does it matter? And you might say, well, I'm a policy person or whatever. Yeah, well, I'm a policy person too, and I learned that because it helps you understand exactly why this problem is as critical as it is. And so it maybe is a little bit boring, but it's really important to do an assessment of what does this quantum problem mean to your organization? What does it really mean? Like, yes, I know it's a cybersecurity. I know that part. What does it mean to you? What are the actual vulnerability points that you need to address? In what order? And why did you choose that order, right? That order matters. And then can you create a floor of knowledge? Because remember, I mean, we didn't all understand cell phones intuitively throughout our entire lives. But now we all have some level of understanding of the RF spectrum. You know that there's magical signals in the sky that if you have, you can make a call, and if you don't have, you need to go find the magical signals in the sky. We didn't always know that, but we do now. Why? Because we've been using it for a while, we've been educated on it, we've had experience with it. Quantum will be the same, but we have to do the work. We have to start working on it, and I think that's been the biggest stopping point for us is like, we have to do the work. Everybody wants to know what's the date by which I have to do the work. I can't give you the date. So that makes that I think that's where we end up stuck. And if we can get unstuck from that, we can create some real security.
And thank you to the audience with your riveting attention. So one of the follow-on activities we are doing as a panel is coming out of the white paper in the next 2.5 weeks on this subject, on a couple of these questions we asked. And again, if you want to get a copy of the white paper, just hit that QR button and just submit your information. We'll send you the white paper free, obviously. So with that, I just want to kind of couple of last questions, to both of you. Like, what is the cybersecurity headline you expect to read first? A breakthrough quantum computing milestone that accelerates post-quantum migration? Is that one it is? A major regulatory intervention governing AI and cybersecurity? Means I can see both of you. Yes, we'd love to hear something of that.
Yeah, well. So I would say, as far as the breakthrough headlines, we've already seen those headlines, right? Yeah. There's already companies publishing those headlines. Now, the level of truth of that is again why you need to educate yourself in your workforce so that you do understand what those headlines actually mean. But I think that what we'll start to see is there will be some big company that finally steps across and says, you know what? We are going to do it. We are going to put money behind it. We're going to put resources behind it. We are going to push forward on it. You may also see, a government agency that might say the same thing. But I think someone is going to have to step off first. And once that happens, hopefully everyone will feel more comfortable moving forward together. And that would be the one that I want to see. What I'm hoping I don't see is some headlines around, other countries are starting to beat the U.S. stock market because they're able to read all the confidential information, or they're, doing other things with, sensitive military information or whatever. That's the one I hope I don't read. But again, there are two conditions here, right? Mm-hmm. The adversary has a vote, but so do we. And if we do nothing, then they definitely have the advantage.
And from my perspective, if you could all walk away with one thought today, you have to think of a quantum computer almost as a time machine. because it's not in the future that you're going to be impacted. What you decide to do today is being impacted by the future machine that shows up, because that machine can break all your comms today. If I record all of that information, if I know what you're using today in terms of your long-lived objects and operational technology, I have the ability in the future to break all of those things. So in essence, think of a quantum computer as almost as a time machine. When it shows up, it's too late. You've already lost your data that exists. The other thing that is unique about quantum computers, in no other time have we ever had to define the risk. Cryptographically speaking, we all pick cryptography to encrypt and secure data for so many years. And we know that it's always been known that a certain algorithm will degrade over time because capabilities of computing augment all the time. So we know that today's algorithm with a certain number of keys will be less effective in 5 years and 10 years and 15. It's been known, and it's a degrading curve, and we can decide the risk we're willing to accept in our designs. That works for classic computing, but when you show up with a quantum computer, it goes like this. It completely cliff function here. That day is, you have no risk. It's like the entire thing has gone from anything that it had to zero. So quantum computers are a very different thing that we're going to have to deal with. We've never had to deal with anything like that before. This is why it's a bizarre machine to comprehend. It comes out with qubits and entanglement and all sorts of funky terminology, but it also has really weird effects, and it does not behave in the same way we've always had machines behaving in the past. So this is why this one change in our life is unique and it's different. We need to pay attention to it in a way we've never had to pay attention to most cybersecurity things in the past. And it's sad that it happens at the exact same time as we're dealing with AI, and AI is all the hype, but quantum is a really serious thing we need to deal with. I hope today you walk away with that.
So let me wind this up by, okay, there's three of us. Just say one word or one phrase that we want the audience to walk away with. And since I'm leading the panel, my one word, one phrase is cryptography.
Resilience.
Crypto agility.
There you go. Folks, thank you so much. Please step up to the mic if you have a question. Nick and Bruno are around, and absolutely. Yes, sir. Maxime.
Thank you very much for the panel and great discussion, first of all. So I just want to bring a couple of, it's a question, but I know very little about quantum, right? But I'm interested in the stock market, right? There's a bunch of quantum companies, and some already have revenue. D-Wave, one of them, I'm not advertising, it's just true. I just heard the CIO. He talked about real machines and even determined the size of that, and talked about that how they have pharmaceutical companies. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I know that IBM has a specific effort in quantum, has some kind of achievements already. I don't know details again because I'm not an expert. If you can comment on that for all of us, just about, because it's real, right? Machines exist. Thank you.
Yeah, so the IBM, to the IBM question, one of the big kind of things that even since years ago was this idea of quantum supremacy. And the idea of quantum supremacy is, can a quantum computer solve a problem that a traditional computer cannot solve, or solves it in way less time than a traditional computer would? And so there have been various times where IBM has said that they achieved quantum supremacy, Google said that they achieved it, and then IBM got mad and they disputed it, and it became this whole thing. So the idea of quantum supremacy has been a little watered down because there's been some debate over like what constitutes that and what counts as quantum supremacy. So I think that that's actually a line that is not as instructive as it previously was. I think now what we need to look at is that quantum error correction. That's the thing that we need to look at. Are they solving that? And if so, that's the thing that I would say, wow, there's a real breakthrough there. But the quantum supremacy has been diluted a little bit, and I'm worried about using that as a direct indicator when there's been so much debate around it for so long.
And one potential approach you can use is to look back at the history of computers. Very early on, computers were meant to be just used as a spreadsheet calculator. That was it. We had not yet comprehended the amount of use cases we could use computers for. Now we do. I suspect quantum computers will go through the same evolution. Right now, there are a few use cases: drug research, material research, molecule folding, and all of these kinds of things. That seems to be a very cool way of using a quantum computer. I think some of these quantum computers have been actually used for that. D-Wave tends to be really good at optimization problems. So they're kind of evolving as we're playing with them a lot more. There will also be winners in the game of software that lives on top of these machines, the same way the Microsoft of the world lived on the hardware. They were a software company that made the hardware sing and dance. So you'll probably see the same thing happens in the quantum computing era. Some quantum computers will be faster, they'll be easier to deploy, they'll be able to address some of the use cases. Some banks are using it for doing analysis of their portfolio and so on and so forth. So I think what you'll see is as time goes, we'll keep adding more use cases and software that will use these fast machines to compute much better than our classic machines can do today.
Thank you, Maxime. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Shaquille, first of all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for speaking today. My question is there a way, even though quantum computing technically isn't here today, to prepare our hardware, perhaps to be able to receive something like a USB that can then install the hardware needs for when quantum physics is actually on the scene? Does that make sense?
Are you suggesting, do we have the ability today to be quantum safe
Yes.
in hardware? Yes.
How exactly do you prepare for that? What does that look like?
Oh, our product, for example, we basically have a hardware device that uses an FPGA, that's one compute capability, to enforce the operations of post-quantum cryptography. So PQC, or post-quantum cryptography, 3 standards have been finalized by NIST in 2024. You can have those running. You can test that they are properly implemented. So that exists today. You can have products today to do PQC-ready machines that can be deployed in operations. So you could do that.
One thing to add is to think about the new post-quantum cryptographic algorithms, right? So if you think about the current algorithm, it's based on a math problem. It's a math problem that is not that hard in concept, but it's really hard for a traditional computer to solve. So you take a really big long number and you factor it into prime numbers. So the really big long number is the public key, the prime numbers are the private key. That's not that hard in concept, but it's hard for a computer to do. So it takes literal billions of years. So what we did is we said, okay, we're gonna change different math. We're gonna make different math. So the post-quantum cryptographic algorithms are just different math. It's called lattice learning with errors. And that can run on a traditional machine and is in fact designed to do that. Now, there are some, it's not as simple as, just swapping out a USB, but that's why, folks like Bruno exist. But the idea is that algorithm does not require a quantum computer. It is just different math that a quantum computer does not help you solve.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point.
All right. Thank
Oh,
you. Oh,
one
more.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
sir.
Yeah. Thanks for the panel. Very informative. You mentioned quantum's biggest risk is sort of asymmetric encryption and PKI. When I think of PKI, I think of HTTPS and TLS certs, which different organizations, certificate authorities issue, like DigiCert and Let's Encrypt. Is there sort of a governing body that can mandate these organizations to start supporting quantum resilient PKI signing, and if so, like what would that look like?
I can probably start with that one. There's a body called the CAB Forum or CA Browser Forum, which is ultimately responsible for the guidelines, regulations that regulate all the issuers of certificates for web PKI. So if you go on a web today and you connect to a server, that server's certificate was issued by someone that complies to the CAB Forum regulations. They are now, as we speak, working to eventually implement their guidelines for PQC readiness in that space. At the same time as that's happening, they've also become very, very intense on regulating the life of certificates being issued. They're shortening the certificate life to help the system to navigate through potential quantum crypto agility at the certificate life cycle. Eventually, the intent is to go down to a 47-day certificate, which means, folks, if you're dealing with that, you're going to have to be automating your systems. The other thing that has happened is because of that constraining the life of certificate, other bodies, if you wish, are becoming added to this system. The banking system has created their own X9, what they call it, X9 PKI, which now deals with issuing certificates for anything that's used in a banking world, like an ATM machine and those kinds of systems. And they're using it to guide and regulate the certificate, the compliance to PQC, and so on and so forth. So what is happening today on the planet is there are different bodies that regulate different groups and segments of users in whenever it makes sense. But if you have a private PKI, you decide when you flip to a PQC kind of standard. But CAB Forum is the first one that I would go look for.
Thank you. We're out of time. I appreciate all of you. Again, you can hit us on the QR code. We'll send you the white paper and to keep in touch. Thank you, everybody.